We are truly honored to have Ms. Wiley with us. She is the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, a former legal analyst for NBC and MSNBC. Ms. Wiley's credentials are broad and deep. She was the first Black woman counsel for the mayor of New York City, served in academia at the New School, and worked with the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. And she discovered tonight that she and Rabbi Klein share the pride of belonging to being alums of Dartmouth University. Importantly, she is a good friend of the Reform movement and an ally to our Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. Maya Wiley, please join us on the bima.
Good evening. I was told to use the microphone on the right, and I answered that I only go left. And so this is a little bit of a struggle for me, but I think we'll get through it. I want to say what a tremendous honor and privilege it is actually to be here tonight. And not only because this is, I have learned, the largest Reform congregation in the United States of America. It may not be true, but that's what your congregation says. It's okay. I'm running with it. But I understand it's also the first evening MLK celebration, Shabbat, with two congregations that reunited. Not just united, but reunited. And that this is a night where the relationships across faith are also invited together. So I just want to thank and praise the worshipers and colleagues from other congregations who are also here in attendance tonight. Thank you. And I will start with an admission, which is I wasn't really sure what I was going to say tonight. I'm still not. But I have a theme now. I have a theme, which is unity. But it's a theme that was presented to us tonight by this incredible Shabbat service and by what this night represents for this congregation and by what this night represents for the continuing partnership across faith community. And for a time in which we are about to watch an inauguration of an incoming administration that promises explicitly to disrupt unity. I don't know who you vote for. I am not judging any vote that anyone made. Let me say that with clarity. Unity does not require agreement. It never has, and it never will. It does require some other things that I'm now going to talk about. But before I do, I actually want to correct one small but yet not unimportant thing that was just said about Rabbi Klein and I. I'm not proud of my time at Dartmouth College. I am grateful for my time at Dartmouth College. But as I was sharing with Rabbi Klein and asking about his experience, my first few weeks at Dartmouth College, two things happened. One, I got delivered at my door. This is actually in the book, so another shameless plug. You should come to Loganberry. But I literally, my first week, and someone comes by to drop off the Dartmouth Review, which is somewhat infamous. If you don't know about it, it was is a conservative paper that is not actually affiliated with the college, but bears the college name. That was a long fight many of us engaged in. but it was supported and created by alums of the college. The title of the front page article on the newspaper was, "I Bees a Black Student at Dartmouth." I'm glad I don't have to say why I felt the way I felt when that newspaper got delivered at my door as a freshman in my first week. But let me tell you the next thing that happened. We had a Hillel, still do on campus, small one, and there was a sukkah, and it was desecrated. That happened too in my freshman fall. And I sat there and thought, as a child of civil rights activists that went to Freedom Seders, because we used to have Freedom Seders, and it would be in a church basement with these long tables, and it would be an actual Seder with black folks and Jews, and it would be a translation of the action that the freedom and the symbolism of Seder would be bringing in the freedom movement for the liberation of us all. And I was growing up in Washington, D.C. My best friend from high school, Mary, is here with me. And I swear to you, I actually think I thought all white people were Jewish. I just didn't realize they were all Jewish. I actually just thought these are all white people and this is how they all are. Except my mother, who was white and a Southern Baptist by raising, but that's a different story. She actually always told me to marry a Jew because they know how to argue with God. And in her tradition, nobody really argued with God. And that seemed to make sense to me, so I did. So all of this is a long way of saying life is complicated. But it's also a long way of saying that was my entry into a world at Dartmouth, in a world that was not only in opposition to unity, but a reminder of how much we're in this together. Because it was the same kind of students who wrote the article that said, "I Bees a Black Student at Dartmouth," that desecrated the sukkah. Now that was 1982, which should shock us. But now here we are, about to witness an inauguration in 2024. And again, I am not talking about who we vote for, but I do want to talk about what we have already seen and how we should understand it. Because I actually believe that despite whatever our political views are, we actually agree on a lot more than is obvious from our political discourse, debate, or what we see in the news, right? But at the same time, we have to find a way to understand it. And even in disagreement with whatever choices we made, whether it's this election or the last one or the next one to come, or whatever ballot initiative is going on in the state of Ohio, or whatever the disagreements, the issue is, what does it mean to be unified on principle in the face of them? And what are those principles and how do we live them out? Martin Luther King Jr., because it's impossible not to have this conversation and quote him, also said, because I'm going to pick up on this quote about power and love that he made, he said, "Power without love is reckless and abusive. Love without power is sentimental." That's why we need that whole quote, right? But we're entering a phase where what has been made explicit is power without love. It's power without love. And unity can't be just sentimentality. It has to be clarified action to protect principles, shared principles. So what are our shared principles? Well, I come from the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, which is the nation's oldest and largest civil rights coalition. We are 75 years old this year. And at our founding, the three primary leaders and their organizations at our founding were Black, were Jewish, and were labor. And the reason, and I want to quote Rabbi Joachim Prince from the March on Washington, because I thought he nails this so well, and it's so important to remember. But when he was talking about, and as you all may know, and for anyone who doesn't, Rabbi Joachim Prince, incredibly important civil rights leader in his own right, but an incredibly important Jewish leader, rabbi, who escaped Nazi Germany, survived. And on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial at the March on Washington, his words were important. And he said, "When I was the rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin under the Hitler regime, I learned many things. The most important thing that I learned under those tragic circumstances was that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problem. Bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problem. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence." I think we know this because the issue isn't whether we have seen hate in our politics. It isn't whether we have seen hate enacted in our politics. We have. It isn't that we haven't known, noticed, and documented the rise in hate crimes across communities. Dramatic rise in anti-Semitism, dramatic rise in anti-Black hate crimes, dramatic rise in anti-Arab American hate crimes, dramatic rise in anti-LGBTQ hate crimes. Any community that has tracking on hate crimes has seen a dramatic rise, every single one. So hate is here, but it's not just here, it's always been here. It's not new, it's not sudden. But the difference is it has been given permission by the silence. And when I say the silence, and this is why I say I'm not talking about who people vote for, what party affiliation or no party affiliation, I don't care. Because the one thing I know that we share as a principle is no matter who you are, no matter how you identify yourself, no matter how you worship, who you worship, or if you don't worship because you're an atheist, no matter, you have value. You contribute. You deserve to be here. And you absolutely must be protected in the right, the central right of a constitutional democracy, in a diverse democracy, is to be who you are. But what we have seen in our politics is a specific call to say that is not true and must be attacked. I'm going to give you one example just from the news cycle. Anyone watch the confirmation hearing of Hegseth? Okay, God had nothing to do with it, Mary. I heard you say, oh, God. That was a godless hearing. But here's why. Here's why. Because the words out of his mouth were that he does not agree with unity in the military. When we had the affirmative action case for the University of Michigan cases back in the 2000s, seems like a million years ago, over 50 retired U.S. generals across the four services wrote a brief to the Supreme Court that said without unity, without the diversity and the work to create the unity across that diversity, the national security of the country was at risk. And that was a politically neutral statement. What he said not only flies in the face of the wisdom of multiple leaders of the military in this country over decades. I won't even remind you of the time in the Vietnam War where firearms were taken from black soldiers because black soldiers and white soldiers were about to shoot each other. That's a fact. But what he said is the only thing that matters is the mission. The unity doesn't. I'm just going to ask you how you accomplish a mission in disunity. But this is a dramatic point, right? Something where we have lots of differences of opinion across this country and across our politics on national security and what it should look like and how much budget we should have for military, how much we shouldn't, all kinds. But this was one we never used to disagree on. And it wasn't a popular thing to use the vision of diversity, of figuring out how we understand each other, how we work together, how we make it work, how we learn from each other's problems, experiences, solutions, how we find innovation for the problems that we share and must solve, how we do that by telling people you don't belong. And by saying that when we see wildfires in Los Angeles, where people have died, with a climate crisis that is a shared problem and a catastrophic one, and with entire communities leveled and people without insurance to even figure out how from those ashes they will rise again. My daughter's friend, we're giving to a GoFundMe for her daughter, my daughter's friend, whose friend lost everything. Everything. And we are hearing in our politics that that is because of diversity, equity, and inclusion? A wildfire? Where we have had experts in wildfires say there was never sufficient water in a desert. Shock, surprise. But that the problem is there are people of color in places and positions of power, and they must not deserve to be there. They. Not us. I'm sorry. Did you know the demographics of Altadena, California? It's exceptionally diverse. It is white, it is black, it is Latino. It is everything in between. And it's not even a part of the city of Los Angeles and doesn't have a black woman mayor. This is what Rabbi Prince was calling us not to be silent about. It's why the Jewish community, so many rabbis were at the founding, at the core of the civil rights movement, standing alongside A. Philip Randolph, Roy Wilkins, standing together because it was also the understanding that if we weren't working on our problems, we weren't going to be unified to support each other across our problems. And I stand here before you today being in a coalition of over 250 national organizations with the RAC and Rabbi Jonah Pesner's, I will proudly call my friend, on our board. Sheila Katz has just joined our board. And so did Maya Berry, who heads the Arab American Institute. And the Sikh Coalition, for the first time we have the Sikh Coalition, the Sikh faith community represented on our board. And I say that to you because in such a time as these, in such a time, we are still making our way together. And when Maya Berry sat in the chair I was supposed to occupy before a Senate Judiciary Committee, that was supposed to be a discussion about hate crimes, about the great replacement theory that has been coming, that is anti-Semitic, that is anti-Black, that is anti-Latino, that is anti, and that has been leveled and utilized and given permission to be on cable television, given permission to be spoken about as if it's a legitimate and neutral theory of the case for the country, something born out of Nazi Germany and utilized to say we who are not white or are not Christian do not belong. Mainstreamed, and we have seen the historic rise year over year over year in actual crimes against all our communities. And that theory, whether you're the Buffalo community at that top supermarket where 10 people were gunned down, the manifesto from the man who did it was the great replacement theory. Or whether you were a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Tree of Life, it was the great replacement theory. I say this to you because what we have understood as a coalition is we have to be unified in the face of that, even when we have other disagreements. Because that is primary to whether or not we have a democracy. Because what is a democracy? What is it? It's the collection of us identifying our problems and figuring out how we solve them together. At the end of the day, that's what an election's about. That's who we're picking as leaders, and it's about how we're trying to identify what we must do. That works for all of us. On that day in that hearing, when I was supposed to be in that hearing, I couldn't do it. I originally said yes. They had to move the date for another reason. They said, okay, well, who can come? We have a task force on fighting hate and bias. And the task force said, okay, let's send Maya Berry because she was co-chairing the task force. And I said, that's great, great idea. Perfect. Maya has been a fantastic unifier, despite how difficult it's been since October 7th, in very different conversations across our coalition. She has been a unifier across disagreement. So I thought, perfect. And she goes in that hearing, and a sitting senator not only accuses her essentially of being a terrorism lover, which is racist, which she is not, told her she should have a bag over her head. We were not silent, any more than we were silent on anti-Semitism, any more than we were silent on anti-Black racism, any more than we were silent when that child in Oklahoma took their lives as a trans child who'd been bullied. Because we cannot be silent, no matter our political identity or any other identity, when we see that. And when we hear that, and one of the things we should recognize is it is a call to point fingers. It is a call to blame rather than call together. And I want to quote what Dr. King said when he made that statement about power and love. He was actually giving a speech called "Where Will We Go From Here?" It was a powerful speech. And one of the things that he said in that speech, and I quote, "Before we reach the majestic shores of the promised land, there will still be gigantic mountains of opposition ahead and prodigious hilltops of injustice." He was saying that in 1967 after the Montgomery bus boycott that was successful. After passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that was successful. After passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was successful. And he was saying that because of the fights that were continuing to ensure that those laws had meaning and that people could feed their families, pay their rent, and have dignity, whether it was at work, whether it was at school, wherever it was. And I say that to you because before we reach the majestic shores of the Promised Land, there are still big, gigantic mountains of opposition ahead and prodigious hilltops of injustice that we are going to see spinning out starting Monday. And the question isn't our politics on the economy, whether we like tariffs or don't like tariffs, whether we like tax cuts or don't like tax cuts, whether all the various political disagreements we have. But when we start hearing the us, them, when we start hearing the threats of retribution, when we start hearing turning a Department of Justice or Department of Education against a community, against people for their voices or their views or their actions that were lawful. When we start to see that if we stay silent, we are doing what Rabbi Prince said we must not. One of the things that we are also witnessing is the great fear that is coming from the threats. We're seeing it from corporations, we're seeing it from politicians, and we're seeing it from universities. We're seeing it from ordinary people who are afraid because weaponization has been promised. Targeting has been promised explicitly. So who will we be? Who will we be? Will we be the people who demand unity? Will we be the people who say, when an undocumented immigrant is thrown in a detention center for an accusation that is unproven and that the conditions become horrific, what will we do? Will we stay silent? When we see bullying in a school of a transgender child or an Asian child or a Jewish child or any child, will we say that the Department of Education has an obligation to take action against the bullying that is a violation of existing law? When we hear that there is going to be a program to take away dollars already appropriated by Congress for women to get health care, will we say no despite the fact that black women died trying to be mamas? Will we say something? And I'm going to tell you this. One of the things that nobody likes to remember about Dr. Martin Luther King is he never bent down. He may have been compassionate, he may have been nonviolent, and he may have called for unity, but he never backed down. He never got quiet. And in that same speech, he said, "A man cannot ride your back unless it is bent." And he never bent it. So I will leave you with the question, who will we be? And I will leave you with my answer. I am not going to be silent.